So when I'm teaching, this is not the view I want to see, i.e. a bunch of bored students looking back and staring at me. Instead, I want to be in a classroom where students are energized, collaborating, solving real-world problems and thriving as a team. This is what I've seen in action with team-based learning. And this is the approach I've been using for the last 4 years in my first year research module. And every year it blows me away with how engaged students are with their learning. If we haven't met before, my name's Claire and I've worked in UK universities for the last 10 plus years. And I help lecturers improve their teaching practice by breaking down effective strategies that make a real difference to student learning. So in this video, I'm going to talk through how you could potentially be using team-based learning in your modules. And your role as a lecturer with this approach is more about facilitating learning than it is about delivering content. And the beauty of it is this can work for quite small cohorts, up to cohort sizes of up to a few hundred students at a time. So it's a really versatile approach. Team-based learning is an active learning strategy where you guide students through a process of preparation, collaboration, and then application. And as you might have guessed from the name, it involves team working. So you get your students into permanent teams of around 5 to 7 students, and they stay in those teams for the entire module. Now let's break down how this approach works in practice. So the first phase is preparation. And so before class, students complete individual pre-work such as reading, video lectures, workbooks, etc. And that's to build their foundational knowledge. And so this ensures everyone comes to class ready to participate. Essentially all those things you would have done as a traditional lecture go into the pre-session work. So it's using a flipped classroom approach. As part of the pre-session work, students will then complete a quiz with about 10 to 20 questions on it. I tend to find 10 questions is sufficient, and I build that into our virtual learning environment so they can do that before they come to class. Just make sure students don't get the answers to the quiz at that point in time. The second part of the process is called Readiness Assurance, and so as soon as students arrive in class, in their teams, they will complete the same quiz that they did on their own. And now you may think, well, okay, why are you getting them to repeat the quiz? But actually it's a really different experience when they do the quiz in their teams because they work between them to clarify answers, to cross-check. They explain principles to one another. So it's another layer of understanding in preparation for the session. And this time students do get to see the answers with the quiz, which again, I run through our virtual learning environment. But as soon as we're done with the quiz, I will do a clarification session. And because I've got immediate feedback from the quiz, I can see the areas that students are struggling in. And so it's those points that I will pick up and I will just do a bit of clarification. So kind of like a mini lecture in some ways, just to give a little bit more depth of understanding and clarify for student learning. The third part are the application exercises. And from my perspective, this is where the magic happens because you get students working on real world complex problems that they have to apply all that learning that they've had up to that point to be able to solve. And these problems are challenging enough that no single student can solve them alone. So that forces the students to collaborate and develop their critical thinking skills. So students work in their team on activities which allow them to apply and expand their learning. The lecturer then facilitates a discussion among the students about the answers that they come up with. And so that's where you are facilitating learning rather than just lecturing at your students. Now, there's a bit of a knack with designing these application exercises, and there's a brilliant framework to help with that, and that's called the 4S framework. So when you're designing your application exercises, you need to make sure that students are working on a significant problem, the same problem, that they have to make a specific choice, and they have to report back simultaneously. So let's have a look at each one of these in turn. So first up, thinking about a significant problem. So the problem presented must be significant to the students, i.e. it is relevant to their future careers. And this is crucial in ensuring that students are actively engaged and that they're motivated to participate in the discussion. The second S is that all students need to be working on the same problem. And this allows the entire class to participate in that same debate rather than just passively waiting for their issue to be discussed. So it just gets all of them involved. The The third S is around specific choice. So the problem should require a specific answer or a specific choice. So rather than being an open-ended question. So this gives students the opportunities to compare their answers with one another, and it inspires that healthy debate that you want to get in the discussion session with the teams. And then the final S is simultaneous reporting. So teams are required to report their answers at the same time. So what I do is I give my students some flashcards with A to E printed on them, and then I get them to hold up their answer at the same time by saying 3, 2, 1, reveal. And then they all hold up their flashcard. And in that way, the students are accountable for their choices, and it encourages teams to challenge others and defend their answers. But importantly, it also helps me see where I can then get that debate started. So I can say, okay, team 3, tell us about how you arrived at that answer. And then you begin that process of facilitating a discussion around the room. Now, one of the first tasks I do in my team-based learning sessions is I get my students to create a poster, which is essentially their team contract and how they're going to work together. And I do that to get them to actively talk about, well, okay, what are you going to do if someone consistently turns up and they haven't done the pre-session work? What are you going to do if someone just sits on their mobile phone for the whole session? What are you going to do if someone's struggling to engage in the conversations? Like, how are you going to solve these real-life team working problems? And then I just give them one rule as part of it, which I call Claire's rule. And that is essentially that when students are feeding back as part of these discussion points, I say to them, every single member of the team must speak before someone else can speak again. And I set this up really carefully because obviously it's challenging for students to speak up, but I really align it with it being an employability skill. So for my students being physiotherapists, when they qualify, they are going to have to speak up in multidisciplinary team meetings and present patients and share about their discharge summary plans. So it's a skill they absolutely have to acquire. And I try and do it in a way that makes it as safe and secure and encouraging as possible for people to do that. Obviously, I'm not going to force people to do it if they really, really don't want to, but you can create that environment that gives students the opportunities. And actually, I found by using this as Claire's rule, what I get in the feedback is actually it's helpful because the students who are always the most likely to contribute, they don't necessarily always want to do that. They want to hear from their peers, but they kind of feel pressured into saying it. So if you could take away one piece of advice from this video, maybe think about introducing that as a rule in the kindest possible way when you're doing these facilitated discussions. Team-based learning often also includes an element of peer evaluation where students can give feedback to each other. I will hold my hand up and say I don't necessarily include this, so you could argue I'm not doing full team-based learning, and that's perhaps something I need to explore a bit further with my practice. So I really rate team-based learning. I think it's incredibly effective. And so here are my top 3 reasons why. So firstly, it promotes deep learning. So with TBL, students must engage with the material before they come to class, during class, and while they're working in their teams. And so this repetition and application reinforces understanding and it helps students to think critically. Secondly, it builds those essential skills. Like today, employers want graduates who can collaborate, who can communicate, who can solve complex problems. And so this approach gives students real practice in these areas, preparing them for life beyond the classroom. And then thirdly, I think it really boosts engagement. When students are actively solving problems and debating their ideas, they're just far more engaged than they would be in a traditional lecture. So I think it's a win-win in that they learn more and I enjoy teaching way more. So in terms of getting started with team-based learning, if you do decide to turn one of your modules into this approach, be prepared. It is a lot of upfront work, but I think it really pays off in the long run and it's way more fun to teach in this way. But I'm going to give you 3 top tips for getting started with this approach. My first tip is to find a team-based learning mentor. So because it is a little bit more complicated, obviously this video is just an introduction. So find someone who is already doing it, who can help you with that process of writing your quizzes, designing your application exercises. There is a great network for team-based learners internationally. And so I'll put the link in the description below because you can subscribe to that email list and then you can hear all the different conversations people are having about TBL. And then when you're ready, you can just post in that email list and say, okay, this is my discipline. Could anybody help me with just getting started? And I imagine someone will be able to help with that. I'm also really happy to help. So if you want to pop a comment in the comment section below, I will always do my best to support people who are trying to start out. My second tip is to start small. So maybe try some of the elements, such as including a quiz or an application exercise in some of your modules, rather than going all in with everything to begin with. And then my third tip really is to embrace the chaos. Like when you run team-based learning in your classrooms, they are lively, they are dynamic, they are noisy. And so really lean into that energy, because it's a sign that students are truly engaged. And I think that's why I'm such a big advocate for team-based learning. For me personally, team-based learning wasn't just another teaching method, but it was a real paradigm shift where I got to learn that my role is not just to give students information, but my role is really to facilitate learning and help them construct their learning. Now, team-based learning really draws on those constructivist learning theories. And I know as soon as I say things like learning theories, it can sound really dry and it can put people off. But actually, when you understand these, it can really, really improve your teaching. So this video really was around a constructivist learning theory approach to teaching. But if you want to know more about how you can use other learning theories to be enhancing your teaching practice, then please do check out this other video here where I give examples of other learning theories. So I hope to see you there, and I really hope it was helpful. If you do use team-based learning, please feel free to let me know how you get on in the comments, and I hope it helps. Thanks for watching.